Hello everyone. Wanted to go over the midterm exam. Of course, I won't give you feedback on your individual exams. The idea is I send out this video and you compare what I say here with the kind of answer you gave. And if you have any questions at all, please contact me and we can discuss your exam in particular. And if I've made any kind of mistake, which I regularly do, then please point it out if I made any kind of mistake in grading your exam. Question 1, write a Kantian analysis evaluating the ethics of autopilot. First of all, a Kantian analysis, for all practical purposes in terms of this course, is an application of the two categorical imperatives. The first one, that your maxim of action must be capable of serving as a universal law. And the second one, that you should never use a person as a mere means to an end. So, first of all, if you didn't do that, that is, if you relied on some general idea that Kantian ethics has to do with duty, or that it is about a goodwill, that wasn't enough. Those things are true. But as far as practical analysis, they don't get you very far. So as I said repeatedly in the videos as we were going along, you really have to do that, or it's not really a Kantian analysis. Now, as far as the application, that has to be judged on a case-by-case basis. That is, whether, to what extent you applied the categorical imperatives to the ethics of autopilot. That I have to look at your actual analysis. I have to see whether you did it in a credible way. That is, there is no one answer here, right? That even doing a specifically Kantian analysis does not, to my mind, mean that autopilot is either ethically permissible or ethically impermissible. I think that you could argue either way. So how you did it, in terms of what answer you came up with in your evaluation, that is really up to you. It's really how you applied them. It's applying it thoughtfully and arguing for your application or your evaluation, really. Let's just think about the second categorical imperative, which is probably easier to apply to the question of autopilot. The question is, that is, if we were to institute autopilot and we were to institute some sort of program for deciding between different courses of action, that would result in one person being killed or harmed instead of another, would that in itself be using a person as a mere means to an end or not? I think there's a very strong case, obviously, that it would. That is, if we were to say that person A is to be sacrificed in this scenario, then we would have to argue. If we were to say that it is in conformity with the second categorical imperative, you need to come up with some sort of argument. One may say, well, if the algorithm were to favor the law-abiding over those who are breaking traffic laws, then we may have some argument, for instance, that we're not using a person as a mere means, that we are just holding them responsible for the actions that they've taken, something like that. I don't know if that would be an adequate argument or not, but if you see what I mean, just as an example, you can't just sort of mechanically apply the either categorical imperatives. You really have to argue about how they apply. So as long as you did that, it's a good answer. Question 2, write a utilitarian analysis evaluating the ethics of the Facebook experiment. Again, the ultimate utilitarian judgment about the moral worth of that experiment is not clear, but it is more or less clear how you go about it. You have to take into account the greatest happiness principle. The idea that an action is not good or bad in itself, it is good or bad according to its results. And the results that matter are the ones that have an impact on human welfare, that cause happiness or unhappiness. And we're looking for the greatest net happiness or the least net unhappiness in terms of our evaluation, whether it's good or bad. We also have to be thoughtful about how we apply it. We have to think about whose interests are at stake, who is impacted. So, which parties and their welfare do we have to take into account? Certainly, the users who are the subject of the experiment unknowingly, Facebook itself, the public. All of these entities have some sort of stake in this, and they're has to be taken into account. Now, the judgment about whether the results were good or bad on the whole, that's where you need to argue. So a sound approach, utilitarian approach, would be, I think, as I described, and then it's just a matter of how you argue it. So I would have to look at the specific answer. The rest of the questions all were questions having to do with basic concepts of Jonas's technology and responsibility. Things that I felt that were very prominent both in the essay itself and in my videos on the essay. That really goes for question 3, briefly explain what is meant by the Jonas thesis. That is what I call it. So I figured, that you would just know that from watching the videos, what I meant by the Jonas thesis. And that's quite important. For this class especially, I think the Jonas thesis is the thesis that modern technology has grown and developed to the point where it demands that we come up with a new ethics, because the ethical traditions, frameworks that we have were developed in a different world, a world in which modern technology did not exist. Technology existed. That was the whole point of the whole point of the quoting from Sophocles' Antigone, the Many the Wonders chorus, that technology has been around as long as human beings have been around, but modern technology has such a power that it changes our whole relationship with nature and with ourselves and with our own future as a species, because technology has never had the power either to be so global in its effects or so permanent, or seemingly permanent in its effects. That is, the power of modern technology has the ability to change nature itself, and also the ability to change the conditions of human life for ever, or for the foreseeable future, or for even for the beyond the foreseeable future. And these are new things. So the Jonas thesis really is that modern technology, because of its power, is actually qualitatively different from previous forms of human technology. And it is different such that it actually demands that we come up with a new ethics that is adequate to it. And the idea, again, being that the old ethics developed at a time when our capacity both to change nature and to change the conditions of human life on Earth were very, very much weaker. It was an ethics of the here and now. And our new ethics has to be an ethics maybe of the everywhere and always, I'd say. Question 4, briefly explain why Jonas thinks that knowledge has a new importance in ethics. It's because, I'll say it. People always say it, and I'm glad they say it. The old Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. There's nothing wrong with quoting that. It essentially is his point that the power of modern technology, because it is so great, because it can change things globally and change nature itself in a way that it couldn't before, and because the effects of technological innovation or technological application of new capacities is so long-lasting in its effect that this new power requires that we have a very good idea of the results. That is, it's perhaps forgivable before if people instituted technologies without really understanding them and understanding the kind of effects or results they would have. It is no longer, because of the stakes are so high, to the point of extinction of the species itself or destruction of what we regard to be things quite valuable in nature. Because the stakes are so high, that kind of insouciance, that kind of ignorance is no longer morally acceptable. We have to know. And finally, question 5. Briefly explain what Jonas means by the city and how it has been changed by the growth of human technology. It's a very valuable idea. His idea of the city was not just a physical place. It was a kind of a moral place. It was the realm in which human beings realized that their actions needed to be limited by questions of morality and justice. That is, when I'm within the city, I'm dealing with other human beings. And when I'm dealing with other human beings, I simply must take into account their welfare, and I must limit my actions according to some standard of justice, fairness, and the good, morality. Outside the city, it's not a question of dealing with other human beings, but dealing with nature itself. The old idea was that the concepts of justice and morality simply don't apply. But this was held up by the reality that nature was too powerful and too vast to really be changed by the actions of human beings. So they didn't have to, in their dealings with nature, non-human nature, they didn't have to take into account questions of moral limits and limits of fairness and justice. But this has all changed because of the power of modern technology. So his point about the city is that the city is everywhere now, because the old situation in which we are comparatively weak with regard to nature is no longer true. At least as a species, we have the capacity to change nature in fundamental ways. And so his idea of the city is now everywhere, meaning that moral considerations of justice apply to all our actions, not just the traditional ones within the so-called city, but even with our relationship with non-human nature. So this is what I had in mind for the exam. Again, compare what I've said here to what you did in the exam. If I made any mistakes, or just if you want to talk about the exam and any aspect of it, please let me know, and I'd be happy to do that. You can always call me as well as email me.